Let us now open the chronicles of the Longbeards and speak of matters that lie deep in the memory of stone. We shall recount the history of that great and ancient delving, the mansion of the Khazad, and the shadow that fell upon it in the latter days of the world. For in the tales of a people we find the truth of their heart, and in the story of Khazad-dum lies the very soul of the children of Durin.
There is a silence that falls upon the halls of the dwarves when certain words are spoken. Speak to them of Khazad-dum, and you speak of a name that is holy, the Dwarves, the work of Durin the Deathless in the darkness before the rising of the sun and moon. It is a name of glory, of wealth beyond reckoning, of halls carved from the living rock. But speak that same name in the tongue of the Eldar, Moria, the black pit, and a shadow passes behind the eyes, and a stillness comes that is deeper than any mine. This account tells of that shadow, and why the children of Aule came to fear their greatest home.
Our chronicle is thus divided. We shall first examine the nature of this shadow upon a name. Then we must look to the elder days, to the very forging of the dwarven race. We shall speak of a time of friendship and the dark gift that poisoned it. We will then recount the coming of Durin's bane, the defilement of a king that led to a terrible war, and finally, the awful price of that vengeance.
We begin then with the central question. Why should a name hold such power over a people so famously redoubtable? Why do the children of Ule, the Maker, who alone among the free people stood against the fire of the great dragons, turn away from the mere sound of a word?
It must be understood that this is not the fear of cowardice. The children of Ule do not flee from battle. They fear Moria because they remember. They remember the echoes of hammers now silent, the light of lamps long extinguished, the faces of kin lost to darkness. Theirs is not a fear of what may be, but the heavy, unyielding grief for what was, and what was lost forever. It is the silence of a sorrow too profound for words.
To comprehend this sorrow, we must turn our gaze to the deeps of time, ere the sun first warmed the soil of Middle-earth. For the nature of the dwarves, the Khazad, as they named themselves, was determined at their very making, in an age when Morgoth held dominion in the north.
It is recorded that Aule, the great smith of the Valar, whom the dwarves call Mahal, was impatient for the coming of the children of Iluvatar, that he might have pupils to teach his lore of craft. And so, in secret, under the mountains of Middle-earth, he fashioned the 7 fathers of the dwarves. But he had not the authority to grant them true life, and they moved only when his thought was upon them, puppets of his will.
When Iluvatar, the One, perceived what Aule had done, he rebuked him. Aule, in humility, took up his great hammer to destroy the work of his presumption. But as the hammer fell, the 7 fathers cowered and begged for mercy, for Iluvatar in that moment had given them true spirits. And the One spoke, staying the Maker's hand, for he had seen the humility of Aule and chose to reduct his children into the great design of Arda.
And they were made fit for the world they were to inhabit. Aule had made them strong to endure the dominion of Melkor. It is said they are stone-hard, stubborn in thought and deed, swift to friendship and to enmity. They suffer toil and hunger and hurt of body more heartily than all other speaking peoples. And above all, they were made to withstand fire, both of dragon and of forge.
This gift was proven in the bitterest wars of the First Age, at the Nirnath Arnoediad, the battle of unnumbered tears, when the dragon fire of Glaurung swept the field and armies of elves and men withered before him. The Nogrim of Belagost alone stood firm. Though their lord Ozagal was slain, with his last stroke he wounded Glaurung, who fled the field. Such is the ancient mettle of the dwarves.
Now we turn to the second age of the sun. Khazad-dum endured through the ruin of Beleriand and the drowning of the world. And in those years of peace, a wonder came to pass. A friendship arose between dwarf and elf, such as had never been before, nor has been seen since.
To the west of the Misty Mountains, in the land the elves called Eregion, the Noldoran smiths established a realm. Their leader was Celebrimbor, grandson of Fëanor. A great road ran from their city of Osten Edhil to the west gate of Khazad-dum, and there was much traffic between them, for the Noldor loved the skill of the dwarves, and the dwarves revered the lore of the elven smiths. The greatest symbol of this amity was the doors of Durin, wrought by the dwarf smith Narvi and inscribed by Celebrimbor himself. These gates were made to open at a touch if one spoke the password. That word, set in plain sight for all to see, was simply Melon, friend. In that age, no other security was needed between the two kindreds.
But a shadow crept into this bright time. Sauron, the great servant of Morgoth, came among the smiths of Arion in a fair guise, calling himself Anatar, the Lord of Gifts. He offered them knowledge, and he taught them skills that enhanced their craft, leading them towards the forging of the rings of power, all the while weaving his malice into their making.
To the 7 fathers of the dwarves, 7 rings were given. And while these rings did not enslave their bearers as the 9 did for mortal men, for Owl had made the dwarves too stubborn to be dominated by another's will, their effect was nonetheless perilous. The rings inflamed in their hearts the desire for treasure, kindling a lust for gold where before there had been only the joy of craft.
The war that followed Sauron's treachery destroyed Eregion. The doors of Durin were shut, and yet the dwarves continued to delve, their hearts now driven by the subtle poison of the rings, ever deeper into the roots of the mountains. Thus we come to the long and sorrowful fall of Durin's folk from their ancient home.
The Third Age was a time of wandering and loss for the Longbeards. In the year 1980, they awoke a terror from the Elder Days. A year later, their great city was abandoned, and its name changed to Moria. For centuries they wandered, founding a new kingdom in Erebor, the Lonely Mountain. But in 2770, that too was lost to the dragon Smaug. Their grief culminated in the year 2790, when King Thror, his mind consumed by his ring, set his feet upon a hopeless path that would lead his entire people to war.
It was their quest for mithril, the true silver, that led directly to their doom. This metal, light as a feather and hard as dragon scales, was found nowhere else in Middle-earth. Their miners, driven by the avarice inflamed by their ring, broke through into a void where no dwarf had ever delved, and something rose to meet them. It was a Valorauka, a Balrog of Morgoth, that had fled the breaking of Thangorodrim. King Doran VI was slain, and the following year his son Nine I. The dwarves fled their home, and the horror was named forever after, Doran's Bane.
Now we come to the grievous act that set the mountains ablaze. It is a tale of a king's pride and an enemy's cruelty, an insult so profound that it roused the long-sundered houses of the dwarves and united them in a cold and terrible rage. Old and witless with grief and the madness of his ring, King Thror came at last to the Dimmeril Dale. He told his sole companion Nar to wait. He said he would enter the halls of his fathers alone as a returning king. Against all counsel, he passed through the gates. Nar waited for many days, hearing nothing but the wind.
At last a great shout was heard. The gates opened, and a body was cast forth. It was King Thror, but his head was severed and lay upon his breast. And carved in orcish runes upon the brow was a single name, Azog. A voice from within mocked that this was how beggars were treated. The orc chieftain had not only slain the heir of Durin, but had defiled his body and cast it out with a small purse of coins, an insult of unforgettable bitterness.
When Nar brought this news to Thror's son, Thrain, it is told he sat in silence for 7 days. Then he rose, his eyes like flame, and began the great mustering. Messengers were sent to all the holds of the dwarves. The summons was answered. All 7 of their great houses mustered their hosts for a war of vengeance.
Thus began the War of the Dwarves and Dorks. It was fought with great ferocity, mostly in the deep places beneath the earth. For 6 long years, they pursued their enemies through every stronghold, from the peak of Gundabad in the north down to the borders of Rohan. No quarter was asked and none was given. They scoured the mountains, driving the orc host to a final stand before the very gates of Moria.
And so we arrive at the climax of this chronicle. The greatest host of the dwarves, since the Elder Days, gathered in the Dimmeril Dale, which they name Azanulbizar. There, they would seek to answer the insult in full. It was a dark and bitter day, for the sun could not pierce the clouds, and the dwarves were to weep amid the slaughter.
All day the battle of Azanulbizar raged. The orcs held the high ground, but the dwarves came on in a cold and unrelenting rage. The cost was terrible. Frerin, second son of Thrain, was slain. Fundin, father of Balin, fell. But then the host of the Iron Hills arrived, fresh and full of wrath, and the tide turned. Nain of the Iron Hills charged to the very doors of the gate. There he was met by Azog himself.
The duel was fierce, but Nine was old and tired, and Azog was a great orc of huge strength. He broke Nine's neck with his iron-shod foot and stood gloating. But his triumph was short, for Nine's son, Dane Ironfoot, though scarce more than a youth, sprang forward with a red axe. He stepped over his father's body, and before Azog could flee, hewed his head from his shoulders. The insult was answered.
Yet Dain did not exult. Though his people clamored to enter the gates, Dain, who alone had the courage to look past the threshold, forbade them. What he saw he never spoke of fully, but it is said the terror of it turned his young face gray as ash. He turned back to Thrain and warned him that the world must change before Durin's folk could enter Khazad-dum again. Durin's bane was still within.
That night, they faced a grim choice. It is the most sacred custom of the dwarves to entomb their dead in stone. But so many had fallen, it is said nearly half the host, that there was neither time nor strength to carve proper graves. And so, rather than leave their kin to the beasts, they gathered wood and built great pyres. Ever after, a burned dwarf became a mark of high honor, a memory of that dark necessity.
King Thrain gazed upon the gate of his father's home. The head of his enemy was brought to him, but he cast it aside. His vengeance was complete, but the cost had stripped it of all joy. He had lost as much as he had gained. His lament echoed the sentiment of his entire people. Khazad-dum was not for them. Theirs was a victory of ashes.
We return, at the end of this telling, to our first question. Having won so great a victory, having avenged their king and scoured the mountains of their foe, why do the dwarves still fear the name Moria? The answer lies not in what they faced, but in what they remembered.
They fear it because Khazad-dum was the greatest work of their people, and to lose it was to lose a part of themselves. And beneath that loss lies a harder truth. They awoke the thing that destroyed them. The rings of power kindled their desire for mithril into an obsession, and in their greed they struck through into a darkness that should have been left sleeping. Their greatest virtue, the love of craft, became the very instrument of their ruin.
And yet, this is the deepest lore of the dwarves. They are not a people made for easy victory. They were shaped by Aule in the darkness, made to be stubborn, unyielding, and hard. They were made to endure, to carry their griefs across the long ages of the world without breaking. Their memory is long, and their patience is the patience of stone itself.
And so they hold to a deep and abiding hope, for it is prophesied that Durin shall return a seventh and final time. And in that age, yet to come, it is said that he, Durin the last, shall lead his people back into the great halls of their fathers. The gates will open, the darkness will be purged, and the hammers will ring in Khazad-dum once more. Until that day, the dwarfs remember, and they wait.